Welcome back. Today, we're digging into something huge, one of the most transformative economic events in modern history. We are talking about the Great Depression. All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the boom times of the Roaring '20s, then see how it all came crashing down. We'll look at how the crisis went global, what it took to recover, and finally, the new world order that emerged from all the chaos. Just imagine that. Closed factories, silence, people lining up for just a coffee. That was the scene in America during the 1930s. And it's a world away from the decade right before it. So the big question is, how on earth did the world's rising superpower fall so far so fast? So to really get this, we have to go back in time. Our story kicks off right after World War I. You see, the war left most of Europe in absolute ruins. But for the United States, well, it turned them into an economic powerhouse. I mean, think about it. While Europe was locked in this brutal war, America became its go-to supplier for, well, everything. Food, raw materials, weapons, you name it. And look at these numbers. U.S. exports more than doubled in just 4 years. That is an insane amount of growth. All of this new money just lit a fire under the American economy. It fueled the legendary Roaring '20s. Suddenly you had cars, telephones, and radios becoming common. People could get bank loans for just about anything, and a whole new culture of consumerism was born. All of it built on this almost naive idea that the good times would just keep on rolling forever. And this is where things get a little crazy. A speculative fever just swept across the country. See, with all this easy credit, banks and brokers started offering cheap loans for people to invest in the stock market. People were literally mortgaging their homes to buy more stocks. This practice, known as buying on margin, meant you only had to put down a little of your own money. It felt like a sure thing, right? The market was just going up, up, up. All right, let's get into what happens next, because as you can probably guess, all this prosperity was kind of like a house of cards. On the surface, everything looked great. But underneath, the foundations were cracking. The market wasn't about investing anymore. It was turning into a high-stakes casino. And you know what? People were sounding the alarm. Big-time financial experts like Paul Warburg saw exactly what was happening. He called it out, saying the market was just a betting game and that brokers were rigging it for their own profit. But did anyone listen? Nope, the warnings were just ignored. And then it happened. In late October of 1929, the bubble burst with a bang. It all started on a Thursday. They call it Black Thursday, when the market suddenly dropped 11%. Panic started to set in. Over the weekend, that panic just festered, and by Monday, confidence was completely gone. The market fell another 13%. And then came Black Tuesday, the day the floor just fell out from under everyone. 16 million shares sold, a historic collapse. The sheer scale of this is hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about $14 billion lost in a single day. To put that in perspective, that's over $230 billion in today's money. More wealth was wiped out on that one Tuesday than the entire U.S. government spent in a whole year. Just gone. So now we move into the fallout. Because this wasn't just a Wall Street problem. Oh no. This was the first domino in a catastrophic chain reaction that was about to snake its way across the entire globe. And here's how it all fell apart. It's a classic domino effect. First, the stock market crashes. Then, the brokers who loaned out all that money call in their debts. But the investors, they're completely broke, so they can't pay. And who does that hit next? The banks. The banks aren't getting paid back, and pretty soon, they start to fail too. And we're not talking about a few banks. We're talking over 11,000 U.S. banks that went under. Think about that. These were people's life savings. People who had never bought a single stock in their life went to the bank one day and found the doors locked, and every penny they had was just gone. The human cost was just staggering, and it wasn't just in the U.S. Yeah, in America, you had a quarter of the population out of work, shantytowns popping up everywhere. But then look at Germany. They had been relying heavily on American loans to rebuild after World War I. When that money dried up, their economy collapsed, creating this desperate environment that, well, paved the way for the Nazi Party to rise to power. It's a terrifying link. And this economic virus just kept spreading. Austria's biggest bank fails, which triggers panic across Europe. In Britain, there's a run on the banks, and they're forced to abandon the gold standard. Basically, their money isn't backed by gold anymore. All the way over in India, crop prices absolutely collapsed, ruining farmers. The lesson here? In a global economy, nobody is an island. So things were unbelievably bleak. The old way of doing things clearly wasn't working. The crisis was so deep, so all-encompassing, that it was going to take something truly radical to fix it. It was time for the government to step in a big way and try to pull the entire country back from the edge. And that's exactly what happened in 1933. The new president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, or FDR, came in and launched his famous New Deal. This wasn't just one law. It was a whole series of really ambitious programs aimed at three things: relief for the suffering, recovery for the economy, and reform to make sure this never, ever happened again. And you know what? These programs made a real difference. Just look at the unemployment rate. It was cut almost in half in 4 years. It wasn't a silver bullet, but it was a start. It gave people jobs, and maybe more importantly, it gave them hope. But there's still a big debate among historians. Was the New Deal enough to truly end the Depression on its own? Because ironically, the thing that really ended the Great Depression was another, even bigger global catastrophe: World War II. The massive industrial effort needed for the war, building planes, tanks, ships, you name it, basically put every single person back to work. It fired up America's factories like never before and ended the economic crisis for good. So, let's wrap this up by looking at the legacy. The Great Depression didn't just fade away. It fundamentally reshaped our entire world, leaving behind changes that we are still living with to this very day. One of the most terrifying legacies is how economic despair can fuel political extremism. The chaos of the 1930s created the perfect breeding ground for totalitarian movements. In Germany, in Italy, in Japan, people were so desperate for solutions that they turned to authoritarian leaders who promised to fix everything. And we all know where that led. The world that came out on the other side of this was just profoundly different. Governments everywhere took on a much bigger role in managing the economy, creating social safety nets. The United States emerged from World War II as the undisputed economic and military superpower. And you even see things like the Marshall Plan, where the U.S. literally funded the rebuilding of Europe. It was a whole new ballgame. You know, looking back, the Great Depression is this powerful, almost haunting reminder of just how interconnected our world really is and how fragile prosperity can be. It really makes you think. And it leaves us with a critical question we have to ask ourselves today.